Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on the time when you are watching this, and welcome to yet another KineDok online discussion. This time we are talking about Honeymoons, Hungarian short documentary made in 1970 by Somjas György in the famous Balázs Béla studio, or BBS. And to guide us through ins and outs of this fascinating piece of cinema, we have with us today Dr. Pócsik Andrea, independent film historian, cultural researcher, and lecturer. Andrea, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation and for the introduction.
I am Silvestar Mileta, film critic and historian from Croatia, and for the most part, I'll be the one asking questions today, although I also hope to offer some comparative insight into Yugoslav and in particular Croatian cinema of the time. So, Andrea, to set the stage for this talk, I think it would be useful perhaps to provide a historical context of Hungarian cinema at the beginning of the 1970s. According to Balint Kovac Ondrej, we are just entering the phase of political modernism in which the form ceases to be the goal in itself and starts to contribute to engage social commentary through artistic means. On the other hand, as Kovesdi Gabor puts it, and I will quote him just a second, behind the idea of sociological documentary, one can clearly discern a view that art is not primarily a mean of self-expression, but rather a tool of knowledge. End of quote. So, in connection with this, there emerges the idea that reality could be objectively revealed through film. So, where do BBS and Somjas György in particular stand at this point when it comes to representation of reality in film, as well as when it comes to their relationship with censorship, which is also present in Hungarian cinema of the time?
First, let me sum up very briefly the previous period, because it's very important because of the censorship rules. Before the 60s, I mean in the 50s, in Hungarian cinema, the state owned and controlled film production used pre-censorship, which meant that they highly controlled the scripts and the whole process of filmmaking. In the 60s, the situation changed, and this post-censorship gave a bit more freedom, or meant a bit more freedom for filmmakers. So to describe the public sphere of this period, there is a very, how to say, well-known three slogans, which describes the censorship roles and the positions of the artists. So in the public sphere, they were either promoted, tolerated, or banned. So these three categories describe the position of the authors. In Balázs Béla studio, which was originally founded in the late 50s, precisely in 1959, as a sort of film club or lab studio where the very young filmmakers who actually were still at college, film college, could have the opportunity to practice. And first, only to discuss the films they screened together, but after that to practice. And in the 60s, there were very important, especially short documentaries made in Balázs Béla studio uh, by the authors, by the filmmakers of the so-called Hungarian New Wave of the 60s about the public life issues and the problems of intellectuals and so on. But at the end of the 60s, when György Szomjas, the author of Honeymoons, started his career, um, the the Balázs Béla studio as a so-called island of freedom, András Kovács Bálint calls it with this expression. So György Szomjas became the member of the leadership of the studio, and he was in these years, late 60s, early 70s. So he managed to make short documentaries in this period, which are completely different stylistically, and um, he was also very close to that sort of movement which published its manifesto in 1969, titled Sociological Film Film Group. So it was a sort of how to say it, sort of protest manifesto against the well accepted filmmaking methods, and they wanted to use their own methods and their own and thus to practice their own worldviews, which was, of course, much closer to the political examination, the political um, meanings um, of the reality, of the socialist reality. They had a budget for 1 year, which was an amount of money uh, compared to one feature film budget, and they had quite democratic rules. So not just the leadership, but the members were able to discuss which film plan they would promote in that certain year, and this little amount of money, how they should spend on the films, on the film production. So it was a quite a unique rule and quite a unique situation for filmmakers in the state-owned film production in the socialist bloc. So to mention the 70s in the Balázs Béla studio could be characterized by two main tendencies. One of them was highly experimental and influenced by American underground filmmakers and influenced the very important scientific trends of the period, for example, semiotics. So these were really examinations of the film language, of the film form. And what was also unique about this trend, that not just professional filmmakers took part in these experiments, but also artists and scientists. So these were what we would call now interdisciplinary um, methods, really. And there were a few striking examples of this trend made by films, short experimental films made by Gábor Bódi, for example, or the artist Miklós Erdély, and many others. So what was very important in this trend, that they examined the relationship between reality and image, and the image. And it was very, it was a revelation in that era of the propagandistic mass communication um, tools or language. I mean the television and the public television and radio. So they, with these examinations, they were able um, to give meanings to the propaganda and the manipulation itself. The other trend was, which Soumya György belonged to, the documentary trend, and it was very complex. So it was highly influenced by this 1969 manifesto. So they argued, these filmmakers, and not just filmmakers, but social scientists they worked with together, they argued that reality, the socialist reality, the economical life, the social life, the mentality of people, the attitude of people should be examined, recorded and examined by filmmaking devices. So these were the two very, very important trends. And of course, there were many different topics. For example, poverty was a highly important topic because it was a taboo in the socialist period, when all the people were equal. I mean, according to the communist ideology, that meant that there were no classes, no differences between the living conditions of the different social groups, which wasn't true, of course, in reality. So
Exactly.
filmmakers, yeah.
The subject of honeymoons is a certain very specific social phenomenon, but it can also be understood as a vehicle for broader socio-economic portrait or critique of a country.
Mhm.
Because this phenomenon, which I'm not trying to pronounce, you are going to do it for us, is in essence an issue of poverty, is in essence an issue of a commentary of the illusions of progress of the society in the era of Kadar János. So, can you give us a little bit insight into this, the origin or and perhaps consequences of this craze for Italians from Hungarian girls, which can also be understood as a subject of poverty?
Mm. Yeah, exactly. So how you raised the question, that that in fact gives the answer as well, because when we start from this global phenomenon of marriage migration, or I don't know how to how to call it actually, interest marriages or marriage migration, which is a social phenomenon even nowadays. It was in the 70s in the socialist bloc quite rare, so it wasn't that common, of course. And uh, in the case of the Italian guys, uh, young Italian guys who came to Hungary uh, in with the purpose of having a good time and spend time with beautiful young Hungarian girls and showing off their richness and all those uh, very expensive, well, in Hungary, they seem to be very expensive cars and clothes, whatever. So, with these tools, they wanted to attract these young Hungarian girls. And the Hungarian girls could see in this acquaintance, in this relationship, the hope for leaving the country and getting married with this guy and moving to Italy, but in a way that they could come back because the marriage was not that sort of migration uh, of political reasons. So they thought they would have the opportunity to come back. And the etymology of this funny word, digózás, it was called. Digo meant uh, an Italian person, in fact. And the etymology goes back to the Italian expression dico, which is I tell you, which is a sort of slang. And why I highlight this origin, because it shows that the guys were of lower social status. So they seem to be very rich in the eyes of the Hungarian girls. But when some marriages happened, and they moved to Italy, they realized that these guys were not of that higher social status.
Mhm. And
So that's to
Mhm.
yeah.
And to relate to what you said earlier about the way of making films in BBS studio, can you maybe take us a little bit behind the scenes of how the Honeymoons was made in particular? And I don't know, for example, how long it took, how long were they filming the protagonists, how large was the team that made it? And I'm asking specifically in this context that you already mentioned. Basically, it's all very new wave practices of getting together, including social scientists and discussing everything, and then go out and make the film. With the 16 millimeter portable cameras and portable sound recorders, small crews. We have an interviewer, the author of the film, that actively engages with the subject and protagonists. He is, in essence, provoking the reality, so to speak, or at least provoking the social contact. And it gives the film a certain, let's say, journalistic tone. So, if you can comment on that, and also if you have any information about the initial reception of the film when it was first shown.
Mm. Actually, about the filmmaking process itself, we have very few sources. We have two interviews at disposal, one with Somjas György himself, the director. It was made in the the early 90s when he recalls the filmmaking, not really the filmmaking process, but mostly the purposes he had during that period. But I think it's quite interesting because he says that he wanted to get close to, as he calls it, the pop culture and the reality of young people, and to represent them um, as they could express themselves. So he doesn't highlight the critique of the system uh, itself. Of course, he did. I mean, the way the film was made, it shows that it was a rather critical view of the socialist system, and the irony he uses through the filmic devices, how these young girls I represented is not really mm, how to say, critical irony, but
Mhm.
more of a grotesque view of the reality. But actually, there is another interview at disposal which a little bit contradicts to his narrative, and it was made a couple of years ago, recorded in 2019, with that young guy who is the only Hungarian guy in the film. All the other people who speak are the girls themselves. And this young guy tells in this interview that he was a filmmaker, a very young filmmaker himself, and assistant filmmaker, to put it precisely. And he was a person Szomjas György knew, and he was asked to comment this phenomenon and to describe the whole situation. So actually, he wasn't involved in the story originally, and he says that he doesn't think it was an ethical way of filmmaking from this distance, because in that time he wasn't aware of the fact uh, uh, what he was saying and how he was describing the situation. But one more important thing, which you asked about, the technique itself. This 16 millimeter camera was very, very important in that period because these were very little crews, and it gave the possibility for the crew, for the cameraman and director to use it very in a very how
Mobile,
to
reactive way.
yeah, exactly. They could get close to the protagonist. It was the sound recording went on at the same time, so they didn't use the post um, um, editing process for the sound. So it was a much closer relationship with the protagonists
Really
and a
protect.
much more mobile, as you said.
Yeah, and since you mentioned editing, the editing of image, unlike the editing of sound, we have a synchronized sound, which is also an important, let's say, novelty, which comes in play with verite and direct cinema. When it comes to editing the image, editing the video, this film is also very interesting. The inserts, I think, are especially thought-provoking. Some of them are, of course, illustrative and they contribute to the sense of narrative film. They develop the story. Others are more associative and I think even symbolic. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Because some scenes are directed in a cinema direct style, so as if the director was following the events. And for example, the whole story is about the death of one of the Italian guys who dies in a car accident, and the reconstruction of the car accident itself is in a very quick editing style, a feature film editing style. As one of the, it's not my comment actually, but as a film historian, Gabor Gelencsér points out in his analysis. And the interviews are really grotesque in that sense that these young girls are very honestly, very openly talk about their wishes, their dreams, and the reality itself. So they, in their narratives, they somehow um, uh, make the viewer understand the conflicts between the tension between their dreams and reality. And that's how their social status is revealed, I think.
Mhm,
So, what I find really striking about this film, uh, how sophisticated the social situation, the representation of the social situation of these girls, even without um, showing their environment. Um,
mhm. Mhm.
yeah.
You also mentioned irony, specifically irony in Honeymoons, not perhaps always being the critical irony, maybe even being a grotesque irony. But I think that in the context of Central European cinema under socialism or communism in general, I think that irony is a very important method, let's say. And I
Mm,
think it also permeates not only through Honeymoons, but, for example, through several examples of Yugoslav short documentaries from this same era. So, if you can comment maybe on some other films from the Hungarian cinema of the age that also use irony as a means of critical commentary, indirect critical commentary that was possible at the time.
mm. I think we have to mention Gyula Gazdag, who made a couple of shorter and longer documentaries in the same very same period, and his one of his shorter documentaries about long distance runner George Cirilla became the sort of opening of this trend of this reality discovering trend, sociological trend in documentary filmmaking. And he had an incredible sense of irony and grotesque means. Um, and his other film that should be mentioned became one of the 100 best documentaries of the world. So it was elected, although it was banned when it was made. Um, Decision is the title of the film, and he made it together with Judith Ember, another very important um, documentary filmmaker. And in this film, we witness a story of um, what are the right words? So all sorts of agriculture experts and party leaders and all sorts of functionaries who make a decision about the ambitions, mm, um, the ambitions and actions of a person, of a man, and we can witness the whole process because they record all the discussions and the language they use and how they formulate their decisions and their reasoning and everything uh, in this narrative and in these gestures, in these mimics, in the in the close-ups and all other shots, uh, gives a wonderful description of the functioning of the system. And although it records absolutely the real process, it is highly grotesque through the eyes of the filmmakers.
And now, while we are on the issue of irony, I think I'm going to use this situation a little bit to insert, let's say, jump over the border and to insert here a little bit of a Yugoslav context. Now, of course, Yugoslavia was an online country and was often perceived as more democratic and westernized in comparison with the Eastern Bloc. We witness such notion even in Honeymoons, where I think Yugoslavs are mentioned as a second best way out for Hungarian girls. And of course, this is why the nature of film censorship was a little bit different than in Hungary. But you also mentioned that the censorship in Hungary previously was often carried out mostly in pre-production or pre-filming process,
Mm.
which was also the case in Yugoslavia. And of course, also as a form of self-censorship, which is why not so many films were actually banned in Yugoslavia. Once they were finished, some were banned, but most of them were, let's say, altered or stopped while they were still in the pre-production phase. But I would like to mention one recently deceased Croatian filmmaker called Petar Krelja, who in 1972, so very close to Honeymoons, made the short documentary called Recital. And that one portrayed a school play on the occasion of the Republic Day. Republic Day was Yugoslavia's foremost national holiday. The school play that was happening in a small provincial settlement. And that play was, as expected, saturated with state symbols, but was also hilariously dilettantish. It was very amateurish. And it was humorous precisely because it tried this play to take itself seriously with a lot of, pathos. And so Kreia also used film procedures that at first appeared as though they are trying to catch this sublimity of the occasion, while in reality they were actually exposing its banality. And furthermore, this revolutionary pathos was juxtaposed with some mundane motives, such as, for example, heavy drinking, people having good time, in the intermission of the play, and also some images of Croatian nationalist and religious provenance sneaked in the film. And this is all why the film was put on ice. It was banned, and it was showed only in 1992, actually, after the fall of communism. In the following year, in the 1973, the same author, Petra Krelja, also made Splendid Isolation, another short documentary, this time on the issue of stark social differences in the nominally egalitarian, class-free socialist society. As you also said was the case in Hungary, of course, all problems also are solved. There is no poverty, and we are all in a class-free society. But the film Splendid Isolation showed that we weren't exactly. And that film was also banned. It was, let's say, unofficially banned. It was put on ice. It was not screened also until the 90s. Now, of course, speaking from the view of the position of the general history, the beginning of the 1970s in Yugoslavia was marked by the suppression of the reformist, more liberal branch of the party, which was led by the younger generation of apparatchiks. This so-called mass movement, as it was known back then in Croatia, it was known as Croatian Spring, but was present in most Yugoslav republics. And to a different degree. Let's say that in Croatia, it spread gradually to student body, then to nationalist leaning individuals and institutions that championed the national culture, while in Serbia it remained more liberal in a general sense. The movement was of course suppressed, was silenced, but some of its demands were then quietly incorporated into the new constitution of the Yugoslavia in 1974. Now, the consequences of this suppression for filmmakers of Croatia and Serbia were not the same because Serbia had the so-called black wave cinema of the 1960s, which was more explicit in its social critique, and which is why some filmmakers had to emigrate. Some paused from directing, or some went to work in Slovenia, which was also a Yugoslav republic, but was, let's say, more permissive in this sense. And some, like for example Lazar Stojanovic, were even incarcerated. Now, in Croatia, the phenomenon called Croatian silence ensued, which amounted to mostly self censorship to a certain degree. Some directors were not able to work on most expensive feature films, and which is why they went to pursue careers in documentaries. That was the case, for example, with Petar Krelja. To a certain degree, Krsto Papic also, but he was able to direct also feature films and some other, Zoran Tadic, for example. And most significant consequence of this whole era or this phenomenon was, in fact, this employment of allegory or of indirect expression of social critique, and which is where irony also comes in. And we saw that, for example, films by Krelja were banned, but on the other hand, Krsto Papic in those same 1970s was really able to film and show several films that were not banned and that showed dysfunctional aspects of Yugoslav society. For example, there was the film called Let Our Voices Be Heard Too, from the same year as Honeymoons, actually from the 1970s, which depicted illegal radio stations in the rural part of the country as a plea for free speech and a more accurate representation of Yugoslav reality, which would go beyond propaganda. Through these illegal stations, people were, for example, criticizing local politicians, local apparatchiks, or they were learning German in order to emigrate. Because if you want to go to work in Germany, you have to learn some language. In Special Trains, the film from 1972, Papic then followed these workers, these Yugoslav emigrant workers that went to Germany, and also in, let's say, a form of indirect social critique. Namely, these workers actually praised the system. They said it's a wonderful opportunity to go abroad. Thank you, Yugoslavia. But that the film does, in fact, spoke about the failure of Yugoslav economy, which has to export workers in order for them to send, foreign currency back to the country. And since, Andrea, you spoke about poverty, a few years earlier, actually, in 1966, another director called Krešo Golik made possibly the most famous Croatian short documentary of all time called From Free to 22. That film was about deplorably impoverished female textile worker. The film didn't actually problematize her impoverished position, but was maybe more a problematization of a phenomenon of how would I say, the ambiguous nature of the emancipation of women in Yugoslavia. On one hand, they were given voting rights. 1945, women were given voting rights for the first time in our history, and they were also they were finally they were able to get the job, to be paid, to get their salaries. But on the other hand, they were not released from their traditional patriarchal roles. They had to bring up children, they had to cook their meals for their husbands. So the film actually got more into this aspect. But the fact is that it showed also rather impoverished living in the suburbs of the capital of Zagreb. So with all these examples, what I was trying to basically show, and what I'm trying to point out, that in Yugoslavia everything was basically fine until pillars and symbols of the state were left alone. And until you practice social critique in gloves, so to speak, through indirect allusions or through individual cases whose systemic roots were not obvious at the first glance. You had some, unique situations or individual situations that were problematic, and everybody understood that. But the apparatchiks or the politicians couldn't, make the very clear line to the systemic problems of the country. And when it comes to censorship, finally, there was also something that our film scholar Hrvoje Turkovic called the uncertainty of criteria. Basically, the censors were left without clear guidelines, and which is why some films, when you watch them now in retrospect, some films that look as highly subversive were made and screened, while some that nowadays in retrospect seem, to be quite benign, were put on ice. So I'm interested, Andrea, what was the case in Hungary with this censorship criteria?
Mm. I think there were different cases. I mean, I would highlight the most um, or pick up really the most important ones. For example, the film made by Peter Boccio, The Witness, that was the most well-known example of censorship, this highly absurd comedy which made fun of the socialist system and functionaries, was banned right after the filmmakers finished it. And it it was put on ice, as you said, for a decade, and was screened in the late 70s, um, when it was invited to a film festival. But in the meantime, the party functionaries were able to watch it. And that was a very interesting story of this contradictional environment, how they used this film as a sort of self-critique, and how they made laugh of themselves secretly, but not not openly in the public sphere, of course. And another example I would point out, which is connected to the poverty issue, is one of the most important films of the so-called Budapest School, this fictional documentary film trend, very complex film trend. And one of its films made by Paul Schiffer. The title is Yuri in English, Cseplő Yuri in Hungarian, the name of the real name, actually, of the protagonist. It is about a young Roma worker, and it has got a scene which represented the extreme poverty of the factory workers in Budapest, but not the Romani, the workers of Romani origin. And this scene was censored, and it had to be cut quite short, well, much shorter than it was originally. So that's how the system made difference between the Roma poverty, which wasn't a taboo because it was connected their national or social characteristics, but the taboo of the non-Roma workers, or the poverty of the non-Roma workers was, of course, a taboo because of the reasons mentioned before. And there were other cases of more experimental films, uh, for example, made in Balázs Béla studio, which had this allegoric way of expression, which you just described very nicely in Yugoslavian cinema.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you. And to return in the end to honeymoons, in an article you generously sent me in the preparation for this discussion, Hammer Ferenc claims that the films made according to the 1969 manifesto you spoke about, among them Honeymoons, they failed the manifesto, but were nevertheless great films. Why do you think that is, specifically regarding honeymoons, which you personally, in your own article, have described as a rarely seen cross section of socialist society?
Yeah, it's very interesting to see these two views or ways of the analytical view, because both see these films retrospectively. So our knowledge about this era, this social and film historical era, um, is based on many, many other examples. And actually, in the train of thoughts of Ferenc Hamel, I think it's very well displayed or very well uh, argued how the so-called sociological uh, trends and attempts failed uh, compared to the social scientific results. So, as he argues, to represent reality with these sociological um, mm, assumptions, but with the language, with the film language, I mean, filmic devices and the documentaristic methods they used in that era. These are two different things. And concerning their results, um, we, the viewers of a much later era, maybe can see the functioning of the social relations and the society, because we have completely different knowledge about it, much more analytical knowledge than the viewers of that period, who had, in fact, who were lack of this analytical view, but they had the experiments, but experiences, sorry, not experiments, but experience, the real experiences. And I think that's what makes these films so valuable. And that's why, for example, a platform like KineDok chooses a documentary like this, because for the contemporary viewers, especially for young people, they can give highly valuable knowledge about the socialist system and not just the system, but the relationship of everyday people, everyday life, and the power structure itself.
Thank you, Andrea, for all the insights into honeymoons and Hungarian cinema of the 90s you gave us today. This has been another KineDok online discussion. I hope you enjoyed watching, and we will see you on another occasion. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Mhm.